Well, by now, as we've all seen, Joe Biden has pardoned not only the Fauci, members of the January 6th committee, but also the entirety of his family. And, Hans, frankly, it feels like in doing so, what he's done is he's effectively tainted the entire Democrat Party. Notice that nobody's refused these pardons. They've taken them on. They may have made some noise and complaining about them, but I haven't seen anyone refuse a pardon. And all of these pardons extend back to the same period, that coincident time, which is anything but coincident, of 2014, which basically is the beginning of the corruption in Ukraine and Fauci's gain of function research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it obviously provoking a lot of outrage, but at the same time, it's rendered a lot of these people kind of almost meaningless in their complicity. You don't get a pardon for nothing. And if you thought the pardon you were getting for nothing was for nothing and it was going to taint you, you would refuse to take the pardon. And of course, that hasn't happened. And it's symptomatic of, I think, everything that we're seeing out of the Democrat Party right now.
Some people have been saying that Biden ruined his legacy with all these, last minute pardons. I mean, I would completely disagree with that premise because he ruined his legacy by being just an absolutely horrifically terrible president in every single way. But so that even if he had never done any pardons, that wouldn't have changed, and history will see it that way, no doubt. But I think what it did do is that it's made it even more difficult for Democrats and his allies to try and make the case that he isn't the worst president ever. That's sort of it's kind of the nail in the coffin kind of thing. The coffin was already there. There were already plenty of nails in it, but they've really sealed it now with their own people. There's some arguments that I've seen where, well, but Trump also pardoned people or whatever. Even if we accept that premise, which personally I don't, because it's a completely different thing we're talking about here, and we can talk about it, the Trump pardons later on here. But in any argument that is Trump also did it is not a good argument because you're admitting that your guy did very bad things. So even if we accept the Trump side, which we don't. So I think this is terrible in terms of I don't really care about his legacy or whatever. It's terrible in terms of the country. It's terrible in terms of just if we just zoom out and you got a president of the United States and the media has been telling everyone for years that there was no corruption and everything was always above board and everything was always super duper. And now we're just talking about Biden family. But we, as you say, we need to talk about January 6th and Fauci as well, because that's all part of the same false media narratives. It's just horrendous. It's a horrendous place to be where, oh, Hunter never did anything wrong. Oh, Hunter never had anything to do with Biden. And then Hunter gets pardoned. Okay, this is a few weeks ago. Oh, but this was just a one-off because Hunter was treated poorly, and the special counsel came after Hunter or whatever. By the way, that's completely untrue. The special counsel tried everything in his power to get Hunter a sweetheart deal, and it was the judge, the Judge Noriega in Delaware, who smelled a rat and put a stop to this sweetheart deal. But even at that point, the media was still claiming that no, this is just a one-off or whatever. And I think all those arguments were just completely wiped out. They were just silenced, and the timing as well. It happened while everyone was already at the swearing-in ceremony, and like within a few minutes of the Biden presidency expiring, boom! Suddenly we had this big pardon with all the Biden names, this Biden, that Biden, and I had predicted this. We talked about it on a previous show. We tweeted about it that at the very least, Joe Biden's brother is going to get a pardon. Well, how does David Wise, the special counsel, figure with that one? Wise never charged him. He was never indicted. It was nothing, right? So why would he need a pardon? So I think
he does need a pardon, but not for those reasons.
That's correct. So it looks horrific. It looks absolutely horrific, and it is horrific. But I think we can sort of do a victory dance or whatever in a way. Yeah, we knew it, and we've been talking about it, the Biden family corruption for 5-6 years. We're talking about Fauci corruption for all these years. We've been talking about what happened to the January 6th prisoners all these years. we knew all that. So yeah, we can sort of pat ourselves on the back about how we knew and this was coming and whatever. But I still think it's kind of just pretty horrific still that it actually happened, and it's right there out in the open. The fact that all these people needed a pardon, and that the fact that the legacy media lied about it for all these years, and most of all, that the guy they were protecting was the president of the United States for 4 years. That man, the man who lied about everything.
Well, that's one of the issues that I have with this. First of all, you already touched on it, but you had the Fauci and the January 6 pardons came out the morning or whatever, and everybody saw it. But then Biden, there was questions. Well, wait a minute. Well, we kind of expected you were going to pardon Jim Biden and other members. All of a sudden, after Joe Biden is already seated at the inauguration, that's when the pardons hit, structured to come out. Just a cowardly maneuver. But there's a larger issue here as well, in that effectively, in my mind, you're creating a scenario where a president could have proxies, people to carry out his bidding, commit whatever kind of crimes that he wants to have committed, either against their political opponents, whatever. Let your mind run wild. That you can have people designated by the president to go commit crimes, and then you can then pardon them at the end of your presidential term so that you could have whatever you want done effectively off the books done. It's already bad enough with our intelligence agencies and the State Department, but in essence, that's what this was sort of setting the precedent for. That a president could literally designate people to go out, commit crimes that he wants committed, and then just pardon them at the end of his term and everything's fine. It's just an unbelievably horrific precedent.
It's just one of those people he did not pardon, which again, I know I'm kind of laughing and smiling here because of the sheer ridiculousness of it all, and in this case also the irony of it. But this is not good. So in line with what you were just saying, did you see that the Vindmans did not get a pardon?
Nor
And
did
then
Jack Smith.
the Vindman wife complained about it, and why didn't we get one? And of course, deeply ironic, the guy who saved Biden in 2019 by pushing the Ukraine hoax, well, I'm not sure he originated it, but he was a big driver of it. He was certainly a tool for
He's a tool.
promoting the Ukraine
the
hoax.
public face.
This Alexander Vindman character, he did everything to save Biden's chances of becoming president by suppressing all this stuff, by talking about making it about Trump instead of making it about Biden's corruption. The thing that the whole impeachment in 2019 and 2020 was about, this phone call that Trump had. Trump has now been 100% vindicated. He said in his phone call, the Biden family's done some, I'm hearing, he didn't even make any accusations. He just said, look, we need to look into what the Bidens did over there. And then you juxtapose that with now where you have actual pardons for all the Bidens. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. And the guy
The Vindmans didn't get a pardon, and the person directing the Vindmans, more importantly, Eric Ciamarella, he didn't get a pardon. Jack Smith didn't get a pardon. I think I sent something out that it's almost as interesting who didn't get a pardon as who did get a pardon.
But isn't that kind of, it's sort of typical of the Biden that I think I saw all these years, and we've certainly talked about it many times, a petty, small man, a very, just a loathsome character. And that fits perfectly well. That you pardon your own family.
The Biden family, in my mind, I've always thought of them as like low-level street thugs. You've got Obama and the Clintons with their foundations and everything they did. Incredibly corrupt, but smooth. And then you have the Biden family, which is just operating like a bunch of, Jersey street thugs.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, we've talked about this many times on the show, that they would just, wherever Biden happened to be promoted as the czar or, viceroy, whatever you want to say, Ukraine, Romania, China, all these countries, as soon as that happened, as soon as Biden had a foothold, Hunter would, and his brother, Joe Biden's brother, Jim, would follow soon after to, reap the rewards. But again, as you say, reap the rewards, not in a smart way, corrupt, but nonetheless smart, by, having a foundation and having donations and whatever, what the Clintons did. Instead, it would be like just direct payments, and then these phony. You and I uncovered this so many years ago, and it's never been talked about. And it still hasn't been talked about, other than that we now have a pardon for Jim James Biden, Joe Biden's brother. This guy got money out of, Hunter and Jim Biden got money out of China, and there was a lot of money coming in every single month. And then Jim Biden took half that money. And that's the thing that's never talked about. The Hunter corruption, I think, has sort of seeped through over the years, like, oh, yeah, maybe he was up to no good. But this guy, Jim, has still managed to stay under the radar all these years. So every month, and we got this from the Hunter laptop, Jim drew half of that money that was coming in. So half of it went to Hunter, half of it went to Jim. And then Jim would issue these phony invoices for, I think it was 82,500 every single month.
Every single month.
And it would just be like business consultancy or just some absolute crap in terms of the, what's the money for. And Wells Fargo, who was the bank that was processing these things, they smelled a rat, and they were like, they flagged it up for fraudulent transactions. And then nothing ever happened. But coming back to, your point, you're absolutely right. So they would do these extremely, street thug type things for $82,500 each every month, right? It's a lot of money, but on the scale of like, the Clinton Foundation.
Clinton Foundation was collecting hundreds of millions.
You are taking in peanuts in comparison. At a huge risk, because you are so blatantly, obviously, cheating the system, and so much so that even the bank then flags it up, even though you're a Biden. So completely agree. Those guys were just operating on a street level thug kind of level, and now they have that pardon. But again, going back to what a loathsome character Joe Biden is, and whoever Jill, whoever was, had this idea of let's pardon the entire family, but let's not pardon all the people who helped us, cover it up, or who helped us advance the corruption, and all the people you already listed. None of those got a pardon.
Yeah, left out in the cold. I think it was actually Rachel Vindman who had sent out something like, if you're, a couple of years ago in the throes of the Trump thing, was, something to the effect of, if you're not guilty, what do you have to be worried about? All of a sudden, she's the same one tweeting that, we didn't get a pardon, how, we're totally betrayed. Well, why do you need one? And there's some obvious answers to that. It was always interesting to me I always thought of Jim Biden as sort of Hunter's minder. If you step back to what they were always trying to do, they were just trying to go into these places and make money for doing nothing. They didn't want to get caught up in anything. They just wanted to allude that maybe at some point somebody could talk to Joe Biden and they get cash. And it wasn't until Ukraine where they actually got caught up and they were forced to do something, and that created the larger scandal. But that's just kind of the way the Bidens have operated. And Joe's always had a, kind of in your face, I'm a, blue collar tough guy, which maybe isn't really that much of an act in a lot of respects. And that he got very comfortable with just kind of bullying his way through things. And ultimately, I think it was that led to that set the stage for his entire presidency, because he was ultimately so compromised that he just had to kind of play along and let others run his entire presidency. He didn't write one of those executive orders. He probably barely looked at them, didn't even know what he was signing. He was just complying, and that was sort of the culmination of basically 40 years of corruption. People forget about the credit card scandals going back with MBNA and getting people appointed, paid off by the credit card companies out of Delaware, where, Joe Biden is from. It's not like his legacy just suddenly developed. He's been doing these things on some scale or the other for the entirety of his career, and it finally culminated, I think, where suddenly he was in basically a very precarious position, and that opened us up to the last 4 years of hell that this country has been put through, because the people behind him could just do whatever they want with that presidency.
What happened with remind me, what happened with the Jim Biden defrauded an insurance company or something to that effect? I know you wrote about that.
Yeah, there's a couple different instances. He was involved, I believe, in the MBNA thing. He got checks back. I'm trying to remember the insurance thing, and actually I'm failing to do that. But there's a whole litany. I mean, that's why I said that I always felt that Jim Biden was sort of Hunter Biden's minder, because he was always in the background doing things, helping to structure transactions. He was sort of lurking in the background when they first went to China back in, was it 2011?
Around that time, yeah.
And they brought back a ton of money in the form of an investment. I'm drawing, I don't know why I'm drawing a complete blank on the insurance side of things.
Well, there was the company went bankrupt, but the
Oh,
creditors
that's right. Yes.
and the creditors were left out
Yep.
in the in the cold, whereas the Bidens just kept the money that they had gotten.
Yeah, he was actually, I'm trying to look that up right now here. This, God, I completely forgotten about that. It was a pretty crazy story where he was actually extracting, I think it was AmeriCorps was the insurance company, and he was actually extracting money out of the company in the form of loans. Things like he was going to rebuild his house and he took out like 400,000 here. I think he took 2 million there. And then never paid those loans back when the company, he kept promising that he was going to help this struggling insurance company regain its footing and be, new avenues of business through ties to him, etc. None of those promises ever emerged. At the same time, he was coincidentally borrowing money from this company for his own purposes, promising to pay it back, would delay paying it back while he kept extending promises. AmeriCorps got more and more into trouble, finally ends up defaulting. A bankruptcy judge tries to go after Jim Biden for the money. I can't believe I forgot about this. Tried to go after Jim Biden for the money, and Jim Biden dug in his feet to the point where finally he issued some petty check. I think it was like, I don't know, 150, maybe $200,000. And even the bankruptcy court judge was just appalled, but just basically come to the conclusion that time value of money. Jim Biden could just continue to delay so long, they might as well take whatever pittance they could get. So effectively, if you want the long and the short of it, he used his name to get involved with this company on promises of being able to help them, extracted loans and other forms of payment, including board membership, for doing so with no help given to the company. And then when the company goes bankrupt, he basically just stalls as long as he can and then pays back a tiny fraction of it. All of that money should have gone to the shareholders in bankruptcy court. Jim Biden kept it. And some of that money may have made its way to Joe Biden because Jim Biden actually took a loan and wrote him a check. So there's some back and forth there. So Joe Biden may actually have some of that money.
I'm sure he does, and you always have to feel bad for Hunter because whereas Jim took half the money from China, Hunter had to share his half with Joe and probably some others. Obviously, we don't know whether Jim had to share it as well. I assume not, but what an awful family, and it just shows with these. With the last minute pardons, plus the fact that he didn't pardon these other people. Now, some might say, well, good thing he didn't pardon, the Vindmans and all these other people. I'm more like, if you're going to be a crook, at least be an honest crook, help out not only your family, but also help out the people who helped you. But no, not the Bidens. And then, of course, we already alluded to this. They also helped out Anthony Fauci. And what I found very interesting about that part of the sort of the what should we call it? It was a pardon bonanza, wasn't it? It was a total bonanza there on the last day.
He saved the most contentious ones for last, as we expected he would do.
And he the Fauci one, they announced sort of, I don't know, it was like 9 a.m. in the morning or something, so that that would take up all the oxygen. Then everyone would move on to the swearing in ceremony. And then they dropped the family pardons, which then kind of got lost in all the noise. But what I found very interesting about the Fauci pardon, and you talked about this on Twitter as well, is that Fauci must have been the driving force. So it wasn't like one day, Biden's handlers woke up and said, "Oh, should we give one to Fauci?" It was Fauci who came asking for it, and it was something he told to one of these stenographers with one of these legacy media. It was either that awful Jonathan Karl, or it was
It was
I
Jonathan
think it was
Carl.
Acosta. It was that awful CNN guy. Anyway, they're all absolutely god awful, horrible. All these stenographers. Anyway, they're the ones that Fauci does talk to. So they got a soundbite from Fauci, and Fauci said, he's glad it came through. Well, those words can only suggest that he asked for it. What did you make of it?
I, I mean, it was. I was looking for the quote here, but I'm not going to bother to continue. But it was Jonathan Carl that he talked to, and it was this. Oh, poor me! I've been such a victim over these past years by all these people pursuing me, and I was only all I've ever been is a stalwart servant to the nation for the past 30 years, and blah blah blah. And I'm just glad that I have this relief. I mean, that's kind of the gist of what he said. And, it's so egregious to see that sent out in the sense that we know what he did. And it's not, I think a lot of people focus only on COVID. It's not just COVID, it goes much further back than that. The one upside is the point that you've been trying to make, and that is that now that there is a pardon, that also removes certain barriers to going after the larger truth of what actually happened. And we've talked before about why we think that's so important. And once again, Fauci was another one whose pardon extended back for probably several different reasons to 2014. And
Right, and this goes back to the point that I made, that Fauci was the one who asked for it. Now, we can't prove it, but when you say like, "Oh, I'm glad it came through," that suggests that you were the one asking for it. And he also
and the
admits
requisite time frame.
correct, and he also admitted that he had been in touch with Biden's office about it. Now, he made it sound as if they're the ones who are driving it, but with Fauci, you always have to expect him to lie about everything. So, we will probably never find out the exact mechanism of how that pardon came about, but there can be no doubt that Fauci was a big driving force behind his own pardon. And that then gets to the dates, and you're absolutely right, because 2014 is such a pivotal time frame. What immediately jumped out at me when I saw that pardon, when it was issued, and I went to the DOJ website and they post them there, and I just, what on earth? The pardon is for anything he did in relation with COVID, and then the date is 2014. I'm like, what? COVID started in 2020. Let's say December 2019, if we want to, be very sort of finicky about it. What we can say September of 2019 when it leaked out of the lab, but you know what I mean. COVID did not exist before 2019. So why is he being pardoned for stuff that happened in the 5 years between 2014 and 2019 and beyond? And then, of course, it's very apparent if you know that in 2014, Obama instituted that ban on gain of function, but Fauci loves gain of function, so he outsourced these experiments to China. And 2014 is also the year in which Dazac and EcoHealth, which, by the way, both of them have now been debarred and defunded, officially no more money from the US government. Again, why did it take so long? But anyway, that's happened. So the first year in which Fauci gave those guys money to do these experiments at the Wuhan lab was also in 2014. So as far as COVID is concerned, that is very clear as to why it's 2014. I think you had some ideas beyond that, which I don't think are, that's not wrong. That's probably part of the calculus here as well.
I would agree with you that that the biggest reason is exactly the one that you're talking about. And, indeed, that's what set off the whole kind of Fauci's flurry leading up to the secret teleconference and the establishment of the natural origin was that 2015 paper, which shined a light on the fact that they've been sending funding over there. So that's the biggest reason. The other one that I threw out there, and I think it does have some merit, is the involvement in the 2014 Ebola outbreak. And that outbreak almost certainly came out of the Kanima lab in Sierra Leone that was being run by none other than Robert Gary and Christian Anderson, the same people who were then brought in by Fauci to write proximal origin and establish that whole narrative. And one of the reasons for that, not only the fact that it was a horrific outbreak that could have been prevented, but they used the exact same playbook in 2014 that they did for COVID. And that is, rather than looking at the biolab that's right at the heart of the outbreak, that's doing research on the very viruses that manifested themselves, they blame it on bats from thousands of miles away, who just so happened to travel all that intervening distance without leaving a trace of the outbreak anywhere else, but only at the final destination. So that exact, not only was the outbreak, horrible in West Africa, but that playbook was used. They just recycled it. They took the playbook for Ebola and they transferred it forward, and they used the exact same playbook and the exact same people for the COVID outbreak. There's slides of Christian Andersen standing up there giving a presentation with his slides trying to explain why bats 3,000 miles away in Congo were responsible for the outbreak in Sierra Leone. And oh, by the way, don't look at the bioweapons lab that we were running in Sierra Leone that was experimenting on Lassa and the Zaire Ebola virus. So don't pay attention to that. Had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, and the cherry on top, of course, is that Anderson had nothing to do with SARS viruses until COVID, and suddenly became the SARS virus expert. So, of course, all of that just proves is that the real expertise that Fauci wanted out of these people, Anderson and Gary in particular, is their expertise in covering up lab leaks. So that's why we had 2014. It just couldn't be more obvious. It's just so blatant, and they made it so blatant. They didn't they say he's pardoned because of his actions to do with COVID, and then it goes back to 2014. I mean, it's like the perfect proof. Not only that COVID came out of a lab, it's like it's official now. It's sort of in the form of a pardon, but also that Fauci was entangled in the whole thing right from the start.
And speaking of cover-ups, then we have the last set of pardons, which is the January 6th committee, covering people like Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney and Raskin and, all the lies that those people were telling. Because really that was, I think you and I still remember to this day, us just kind of watching what was unfolding on that day and just knowing how it was going to be manipulated and used, that this was going to be sort of a PR disaster. And the J6 committee immediately set up shop to make the most of that. And boy, did they make the most of it. Now, finally, some of there's been some light getting shined onto that. And, we've had, the committee that's been investigating it. Their opinion on the matter was so strong that they said that the level of basically lies, deception, and manipulation was so great that every single result out of the J6 committee should be completely disregarded. So finally we were getting pushback, but it has sort of reached a point where people were beginning on the larger basis, beginning to realize that, hey, there's something really wrong at this J6 committee, that witnesses were manipulated. We've talked about that before, testimony manipulated, records destroyed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then what happens? A pardon for all of these people.
And for those people who, especially on the left, who have been arguing that, this is just to preempt Trump from, seeking revenge and so on, I'd only come back to what you said earlier here, which was, what about all the people who didn't get a pardon? If this was truly about stopping Trump and revenge, why shouldn't those people get a pardon as well? And of course, the fact of the matter is that the pardons were issued because there were real offenses there that needed to be pardoned, that Biden or his handlers wanted to pardon. Fauci really talked about January 6th, just making up stories. Remember that Cassidy Hutchinson just completely made stuff up. I mean, we know a bunch of the people that she talked about, it never happened.
Just outlandish fabrications that came off of the fact they went to her and said, look, your testimony isn't enough. We need something. We need, red meat. And then she turned around and gave it to him with the most outlandish lies, all of which have been disproven. And just bear in mind that there was one notable, we've talked about people who haven't been pardoned, but once again, Jack Smith wasn't pardoned. And we already have reports that he wasn't pardoned because Joe Biden was deeply upset that he was so ineffectual in his prosecution of Trump.
Lastly, we've been asked about undoing these pardons. Is there a way of somehow revoking them or whatever? All these last minute pardons here by Biden. And of course, very legitimate questions are being asked about the signatures, for instance. Why do they look so different between the earlier pardons from last year and the ones now? Was it by computer? Was it by machine? Was it just a stamp? Let's just, unfortunately, I don't think, and maybe that's actually not unfortunate. We're not going to be able to undo those pardons. It's just not going to happen. It's just a presidential power, and it is what it is. And of course, the problem is if you try and undo it, then they're going to try and do it to you next time around. So I think that the doors have been closed as far as undoing any of that. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be scrutiny. I think the country deserves to know what exactly happened there. How did all these last minute pardons come about? Who was actually running the show? Because we know that Joe Biden certainly wasn't. So I would focus on that. And just the idea, as sad as some people, might feel about it, the idea of undoing them, of, declaring them invalid or whatever, that's just not going to happen.
At one point, we had actually put out what, given that Joe Biden is clearly and demonstrably not, of sound mind, would that impact his ability to issue pardons? But unfortunately, there's a big problem with that, and the Republican Party probably plays a big role. If that was such an issue, if that was true, why wasn't Joe Biden ever impeached? Why wasn't that avenue never pursued? And it wasn't. So my best guess is that you're 100% right, that we can't do anything. But we do have to close off this precedent of a president being able to use people as his proxies to commit crimes and then just pardon him to be able to get away with the whole scheme. That's something that's purely untenable.